Recently, a woman was murdered in my apartment building. Like many of my neighbors, I knew her well. She wasn't exactly known for leading a modest lifestyle. She lived alone, had no children, and often entertained a revolving door of male visitors. Her nights were filled with loud music, heavy drinking, and raucous arguments, much to the frustration of the building's other residents. The noise and chaos often lasted well into the early hours of the morning. One night, after one of her infamous parties, a drunken altercation broke out in the hallway. The woman was attacked and stabbed over 30 times. She died before even reaching the operating room. The blood splattered on the walls and floors of the building was so intense that it took multiple attempts to scrub it clean, repaint, and cover the stains. I don't know who organized her funeral, but I heard she was buried in a nearby cemetery. Investigators came to our building several times, asking questions, but my family and I had been out visiting relatives that day, so we couldn't provide any useful information. Rumors spread that the killer had been caught, and her apartment was sealed off shortly after. Over time, things began to settle down, though a heavy, eerie atmosphere lingered. It was less than a month after the incident when the day came that I can't forget. I was coming home from my late-night shift, as usual. The streets were quiet, and the air was heavy with the kind of silence that presses on your chest. I walked into the building and started climbing the stairs to my apartment. I have to admit, every time I passed the floor where the murder took place, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease. It wasn't fear exactly, but a deep, unsettling anxiety. That night was no different. I quickened my pace as I approached the landing above it. The building had motion-activated lights installed in the stairwells. As you ascend, the lights on the lower floors dim, and the ones on the current floor light up. It's a pretty standard setup. But as I reached the landing near my floor, the bulbs on both my floor and the one below shattered simultaneously. The sudden darkness enveloped me in a thick, oppressive shadow. Then I heard it. A piercing, blood-curdling scream erupted from behind me. It was a woman's scream, raw, hysterical, and so loud it echoed through the entire stairwell. My blood turned to ice, and my legs nearly gave out beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The fear was so intense that I thought my heart would stop. The next thing I knew, I was being woken up by the sharp smell of ammonia and the beam of a flashlight. A neighbor had found me collapsed on the landing. He was holding me by the arm, asking what had happened and who the woman screaming in the stairwell had been. Another neighbor, who had been smoking on the roof, said he'd heard the building's front door slammed shut, followed by the scream. He had rushed down with a lighter for light and found me unconscious. Soon, other neighbors gathered, bringing flashlights and even smelling salts to help me recover. Everyone was shaken, but no one could explain what had happened. Since that night, I've struggled to sleep. I take calming medication, but the memories of the scream haunt me. Rational explanations elude me, and I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this world than what we see. Something else exists, something vast, terrifying, and beyond our understanding. After that night, life in the building changed. Everyone who had been there and heard the scream shared different details, but no one could explain what had happened. Some tried to blame it on nerves or residual tension from the murder, but most just kept quiet, as if afraid to speak of it aloud. A couple of days later, I tried to calm down and return to my usual routine. But the anxiety wouldn't let go. In the quiet of the night, the stairwell no longer felt like an ordinary place. Every creak, every faint step, every distant sound felt like something, or someone, was there. Every time I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt a presence behind me, watching. One night, returning from a late shift, I noticed the light on the landing where the murder had occurred stayed on longer than usual. The motion-activated bulb didn't dim as it should have. It was as if someone was standing there. But there were no footsteps, no movement. As I got closer, the light flickered, and I saw a shadow glide along the wall, disappearing into nothing. My heart began to race. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but as I passed the door to her apartment, I heard a faint whisper. The voice was barely audible, but I could clearly make out the words. "Do you hear me?" A chill ran down my spine. I hurried up the stairs, trying not to think about what I had just experienced. But that was only the beginning. The next night, I woke up to a loud thud. The sound came from the stairwell, as if something heavy had fallen or someone had slammed against the metal door. My dog, who usually slept peacefully at the foot of my bed, perked up her ears and let out a low growl. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of my apartment. The stairwell was eerily silent. I directed the flashlight beam downward, toward the landing where the murder had taken place. There, on the floor, I saw dirty footprints, barefoot prints. They led from the stairs to the door of her apartment. But that door had been sealed shut long ago, and no one could have entered. Or left. Paralyzed with fear, I stood frozen. Suddenly, the light above me flickered, and I heard it again. The whisper. Louder this time, more insistent. "Do you hear me? Look at me!" I took a step back, desperate to retreat to my apartment, but then the door to her apartment began to creak open. Slowly, with a terrible screech, it moved, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A cold draft, as if from nowhere, swept over my face, and from the blackness, a faint light began to glow. And then I saw her. The silhouette of a woman, but her face, it was horrifyingly disfigured. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with pain and fury. Her mouth stretched into a grotesque grimace, and she started moving toward me, letting out that same hysterical scream I had heard that night. I ran without looking back, nearly slamming into a neighbor's door in my panic. When I reached my apartment and locked the door, the screaming stopped. But I could still hear faint footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Since that night, I haven't been able to stay in my home without unease. Every night, I hear faint footsteps in the stairwell. Whispers, cries, distant banging. Every time I pass her door, I feel it waiting for me to stop, to turn around, and look at her again.